Everybody could join me, please. At the bottom of the page there, underneath the Heart Sutra, the Gaton opening the sutra. If everybody would please read that along with me. The Dharma, incomparably profound and infinitely subtle, is rarely encountered, even in hundreds of thousands of millions of ages. Now we see it, hear it, receive and maintain it. May we completely realize the Tathagata's true meaning. First week of the month, we talk about scripture, which I don't usually record, but actually I'm recording tonight. In part maybe to prove to Gonghe that I actually remembered to do that little bit that we just did, but also because I usually don't record these because I'm not sure they'd be that interesting, and also because often I'm reading from something that's copyrighted and I don't want to get in trouble with, anything like that. But tonight, what I'm going to be reading from tonight is kind of a Commons public document that as long as you give a reference to where it came from, you can use. And this is one I think some folks might actually find interesting. We have this pattern of going back and forth between Mahayana Sutras and the Pali Canon. And actually talking about what I'm going to talk about tonight pairs up with what I talked about last time. A month ago with the Mahayana tradition, I talked about kongons, right? This unique literature that we use in the Chan, Son, Zin, Den traditions, these stories about encounters between teachers and students that are really unique. What I want to talk about tonight is something from the Pali Canon, which is, it's not the same thing, but it's similarly unique. It's a unique kind of a text. What I'm going to talk about tonight is what's called the Therigatha. The Therigatha and the Therigatha are a pair of documents in the Pali Canon. They're in the Sutta Nipita. I'm lost. I just locked up on a word. The basket of discourses. Gata just means poem, right? It just means a verse. Thera or Theri means elder, an elder male elder or a female elder. Sutta Pitaka. Pitaka was the word I was trying to say a minute ago, and senior moment. I'm going to focus on the Therigatha. The Therigatha is a collection of poems. It's poems of the elders, right? The elder monks. These are both part of the Khuddaka Nikaya, the collection of kind of short, minor discourses. The Therigatha has 264 poems in it. It's 1,291 stanzas of poem written by these early male disciples of the Buddha. And it looks like these were written, if not completely, mostly during the Buddha's lifetime. So these would have been poems written by monks who actually studied with the Buddha, who knew that had met the Buddha. The Therigatha is a similar collection in the Khuddaka Nikaya of 73 poems, 522 stanzas, written by bhikkhunis, female monastics, the nuns. Again, most, if not all, written during the lifetime of the Buddha. These recount their struggles, their accomplishments kind of along the way in the course of their training. There's just incredible truth that comes out of these stories, and you get some insights not only to their experiences in their monastic lives, but how their lives were like before. The selections I'm going to be reading from, the particular translation is called Poems of the Elders, an anthology from the Therigatha and Therigatha by Thanissaro Bhikkhu. This is not a complete collection of all of the texts. It's only, 120. It's 120 of the poems out of both of the texts together. He refers to the Therigatha as the earliest extant text depicting women's spiritual experiences. This is the oldest written text in the world in any religious tradition written from a feminine perspective. So it's really, really unique and special. The arrangement of the text is kind of interesting. It's actually a little bit like the opposite of the way the Quran is arranged in the Islamic tradition. It starts with the shortest poems and just goes to the longest ones. It's just arranged by length, which is kind of an interesting way to have done it. So part of the reason I wanted to do this text is because I want to be able to tell you a story. And the story is related to one of these poems. And I'm going to kind of end with that story. I'm working my way up to that story. That's the longest poem that I'm going to read to you tonight. This is not a happy story. It's actually a pretty horrible story. But it's an incredibly instructive story. So I think there's a lot of value in it, even though it is by no means a happy ending kind of a story. I'll get to that in a minute. So I'm going to read some of these poems. I'm going to explain a little bit about a couple of them as we go along. The first one I'm going to read is attributed to Sumangala's mother. So we don't even know the name of the woman who wrote this. We just know her daughter's name. So Sumangala's mother. So this is her poem. This one's just really potent. So freed, so freed. So thoroughly freed am I from my pestle, my shameless husband, and his sunshade making, my moldy old pot with its water snake smell. Aversion and passion I cut with a chop. Having come to the foot of a tree, I do jhana from the bliss, thinking, what bliss. Now, I really love that one because you really get a strong sense of this was a woman who maybe did not have a very happy life. She clearly was not thrilled with her husband, right? She felt tied to her, kitchen duties, her cooking pot with its water snake smell, right? And she went from that to this freedom, right? The bliss of the freedom of the spiritual attainment that the Buddha helped her to get to. The second one I want to read is attributed to Vimala, the former courtesan, right? So this is a prostitute, right? A woman who, again, had a very different life before she became a bhikkhuni. Intoxicated with my complexion, figure, beauty, and fame, haughty with youth, I despised other women. Adorning this body, embellished to delude foolish men, I stood at the door to the brothel, a hunter with a snare laid out. I showed off my ornaments and revealed many a private part. I worked my manifold magic, laughing out loud at the crowd. Today, wrapped in a double cloak, my head shaven, having wandered for alms, I sit at the foot of a tree and attain the state of no thought. All ties, human and divine, have been cut. Having cast off all effluence, cooled am I, unbound. Right. So again, this is a really powerful account of a woman whose life was one way, and in the course of her spiritual training, I would love to know what the story is, about how did that happen, that transition. What was the experience that caused that shift? The next one is from, and you'll see these get a little longer as we go because that's the way the book's arranged, right? Mittakali. This poem's by Mittakali. Going forth through conviction from home into homelessness, I wandered this place and that, greedy for tribute and gains. Missing out on the foremost goal, I pursued a lowly one. Under the sway of defilements, I didn't awaken to the goal of the contemplated life. Then, sitting in my dwelling, I suddenly came to my senses. I'm following a miserable path. I'm under the sway of craving. Next to nothing, my life crushed by aging and illness. Before the body breaks apart, I have no time for heedlessness. After watching, as it actually was, the arising disbanding of aggregates, I stood up with mind released, the awakened one's bidding done. So this is a woman whose story is, she was already a nun. She was already a bhikkhuni. But then she realized, I'm just kind of enjoying the attention that I get, my status. You know, who knows again what her life was like before. Maybe she was a fairly low status person. Maybe a low caste woman in the Indian society, which has a caste at this time definitely had a caste system. Right? And actually becoming a bhikkhuni gave her status and respect that maybe she didn't get before. Right? And she's enjoying that status and that respect. And then she realized, I'm wasting my time. Right? I'm frittering my opportunity away here, this unique human life that I have. I need to get on the stick. I need to get back on the path. I need to return to the goal that I set when I took my vows, when I shaved my head, when I put on these robes. I had goals, and I need to get back to them. The next one was written by, tradition says, Mahapajjapi Gautami, the Buddha's aunt and stepmother, right? The original nun, the woman who convinced the Buddha to allow women to become monastics in the first place. Right? So this is an incredibly important woman. And the way she refers to the Buddha, having been the woman who raised this child, right? This was the sister of the Buddha's mother, Maya, who died shortly after he was born, who raised this boy, who then became the Buddha. So this is the poem she wrote about her experience becoming a bhikkhuni. Awakened, hero, homage to you, highest of all beings, you who've released me and many other people from suffering. I've comprehended all stress, dried up craving, the cause, developed the Eightfold Path, and touched cessation. Before I was mother, son, father, brother, grandmother. Not knowing things as they were, I wandered on without respite. But now that I've seen the Blessed One, this is my last body heap. Birth and wandering on are totally ended. There is now no further becoming. I see the disciples gathered, their persistence aroused, resolute, constant, in strong exertion. This is the worship of the Buddhas. Truly for the benefit of the many did Maya give birth to Gautama, thrusting away the mass of pain of those mired in illness and death. Got two more. This one's attributed to Vijaya. I don't know anything about this person, but it's a really interesting poem. 4 times 5 I ran amok from my dwelling, having gained no peace of awareness, my thoughts out of control. So approaching a nun, I cross-questioned her attentively. She taught me the Dhamma, aggregates, sense media, properties, 4 noble truths, 5 faculties, 7 factors of awakening, the Eightfold Path for attaining the highest goal. Hearing her words, I did her bidding. In the first watch of the night, I remembered past lives. In the second watch of the night, I purified the divine eye. In the third watch of the night, I burst the mass of darkness. Then I stayed, suffusing my body with rapture and pleasure. On the 7th day, I stretched out my legs, having burst the mass of darkness. So that's a very powerful account of the experience, right? The experience of that breakthrough, that samadhi. Now this brings me to the last one. And this is where the story comes in. Because this last one's a little odd. This is the story of Kissa Gautami. The odd thing about this one is there's a poem. It probably comes as no surprise to tell you every scripture has commentaries that have been written about it, right? And that these apply as well. There are commentaries about these poems. The thing that's weird about this one is the commentary and the poem don't match, right? The commentary tells a story, that is very, very different from the story that's in the poem. So that's odd, right? It doesn't seem like they go together. And there's even some confusion in the commentaries about who the person is. Is it Kisagodami? Is it Patakara, of whom there's another poem in the collection attributed to Patakara? So whose life is being told here? It's very, very odd. It doesn't really make sense. Some scholars think that maybe what happened here is, obviously, these texts were compiled at a later time, right? That maybe we've got different traditions that got pulled together here, and they had two great stories, and they didn't want to lose either one. So they put them both together, this poem and this story, that allegedly are about the same person, even though they don't match, even though they don't go together. Both of them are really powerful, and they definitely have a common theme, as you're going to see. But the whole reason why I wanted to talk about the Therigatha is so I could tell you the story of Kisagodami. Because I think the story of Kisagodami might be one of, if not the most powerful stories about the power of the Dharma to change a person's life. So first I'm going to read you the poem. I'm just going to read through it. And then I'm going to tell you the story that the commentary gives for Kisagodami, which again does not actually match the poem, though it has an element in common. So here's the poem that's attributed to Kisagodami. Having admirable friends has been praised by the sage with reference to the world. Associating with an admirable friend, even a fool becomes wise. People of integrity should be associated with. In that way, discernment grows. Associating with people of integrity, one would be released from all suffering and stress, would know stress, the origination of stress, cessation, and the Eightfold Path, the Four Noble Truths. Stressful, painful is the woman's state. So says the tamer of tameable people. That's the Buddha. Being a co-wife is painful. Some, on giving birth once, slit their throats. Others of delicate constitution take poison. In the midst of a breech birth, both mother and child suffer destruction. Going along about to give birth, I saw my husband dead. Giving birth in the road, I hadn't reached my own home. 2 children deceased, my husband dead in the road, miserable me. My mother, father, and brother were burning on a single pyre. Your family all gone, miserable. You've suffered pain without measure. Your tears have flowed for many thousands of lives. Then I saw in the midst of the carnal ground the muscles of sons being chewed. With family killed, despised by all, my husband dead, I reached the deathless. I've developed this path, noble, eightfold, going to the deathless. Having realized unbinding, I gazed in the mirror of Dhamma. I've extracted the arrow, put down the burden, done the task. I, Kisagodami Teri, my heart well released, have said this. So that's the poem that's attributed to Kisagodami. But then there's the story that's in the commentary, which is different. So here's the story. One of the things I love about this story is that you can think of it as a kind of a parable, and interestingly, it's a parable about mustard seed. So if you're familiar with the Bible, that might sound familiar. It's a very different kind of story than the one Jesus told, but it's still about mustard seed. Kisagodami was a young mother in this version of the story. She had a young child, a toddler. The child became ill. Kisagodami did everything she knew to do. She comforted the child. She tried to cool the child's fever. She tried to find things that would help the child. It was all to no avail, and the child died. And she was bereft. She was heartbroken. She walked around the village carrying the body of her child, asking everyone she met for medicine that would cure her child of death. And of course, everyone said, "We can't help you. We don't have any magical medicine. We don't have anything we can give you. It's very sad, but we can't help you. And she went from house to house. And finally, she met a person who said, there's this man. There's this man they call the Buddha. You should go to him. If anyone can help you, you should go to him. So Kisagodami now has been walking for days without sleep, without food, without water, carrying the body of her child. And she goes to where the Buddha is, and she meets the Buddha, and she says to the Buddha, my child, help my child. If you have medicine that can help my child, please give it to me. And she says, the Buddha says to Kisagodami, I have the medicine you need. In order for me to give it to you, I need you to do something first. I need you to go find a house and get some mustard seed. But it has to be a house where no one has died. Find a house where no one has died, ask them for mustard seed, and bring it back to me, and I will give you the medicine you need. So Kisagodami does this. She begins to walk from house to house. She goes to every door that she can find. She knocks on the door. She meets the people. She says, would you please, for the sake of my child, give me mustard seed? And they say, certainly, we'd be happy to do that. But Kisagodami says, tell me though first, has anyone in this house died? And every house she goes to, the answer is, well, of course. Our parents died. The spouse died. This child died. We've lost 3 people just in the last year alone. Every house she went to, someone had died. So she was never able to get the mustard seed, because every place she went, they were happy to give her the mustard seed, but someone in that home had already died. And eventually she realized that this is the human condition. This is what happens to all of us. This is what it means to be a living thing. This is the impermanence of the mortality of living in a body, of being a being of flesh. All composite things return to their component parts. Every living thing dies. She took her child to the charnel ground. She went back to the Buddha, and she took the vows, and she entered into homelessness, and she became a bhikkhuni, and she strove in her spiritual quest and became an arhat, became enlightened, because the Buddha gave her the medicine that she needed. It wasn't the medicine she was asking for, but it was the medicine that she needed. He taught her the lesson that she needed to learn, to live in a body, to be a being, to be a human being, to struggle with the impermanence of everything that goes with that, of having a body and living as a human being. So I think that's an incredibly powerful story that illustrates the central lesson of the Buddha's teaching. There's a reason why another word for enlightenment is the deathless, right? Because that's the central lesson that we have to figure out. That's the crux of being a human being, of being a mortal being in a body, and yet having a brain that's big enough and smart enough to realize everything that goes with that and all of its implications. So I think that there's a really powerful lesson in this story of Kisagodami, and it definitely illustrates I think maybe it's a great illustration of what I say every night at the end of our services, right? Do not squander your life, right? We have a limited time here. What are we going to do with it? What did Mary Oliver say? What are you going to do with your one wild and wonderful life, or something along those lines, right? And what the Buddha's lesson says is, what the Buddha's teachings say is, we need to have this spiritual experience. We need to understand We need to let go of our ignorance and our craving and understand what it means to be alive. So I hope that this is a motivational story. Again, it's not a happy story, but in many ways it's an incredibly human story. It's an incredibly common story. And so I think it's very powerful and very motivating.